Hello there. Today I'm going to take a look at a New Zealand wine, quite a classic New Zealand wine. You'd think a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, but this is a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. This is Rimapere Lot 101. It's the 2022 Sauvignon Blanc, but it's a wine bearing the name Baron Edmund de Rothschild. So this is from the collection of wines produced by Baron Edmund de Rothschild Heritage Wineries. Rimapere is a Maori word from the Maori language Te Reo, and evidently it means 5 arrows, and the 5 arrows commemorates the fact that the Rothschild family coat of arms has 5 arrows in it, and those are the 5 arrows representing the 5 sons of Mayer Amschel Rothschild, who was the man who founded the Rothschild banking dynasty. The brand Rimapere was created in 2012 by Baron Benjamin de Rothschild, Edmund de Rothschild's son, and the brand is a joint venture with the American-born Australian businessman Terry Peabody, the owner of the well-known and well-respected Craggy Range winery in New Zealand's Hawke's Bay. Now, Baron Benjamin de Rothschild was the largest shareholder at the time in Chateau Lafite, but his company, which now bears the Baron Edmund de Rothschild heritage name, also owns outright 2 estates in Bordeaux, Chateau Clarke in Listrac and Chateau de Laurets in Saint Emilion. They have a joint venture in the Rioja region of Spain with the famous producer from Ribera del Duero, Vega Sicilia. They have an interest in a company called Rupert Rothschild in South Africa, and also Flechas de Los Andes in Mendoza in Argentina. Very recently they bought the Akarua winery in New Zealand's Central Otago region. Rimapere is a 24-hectare plot on Rappaura Road in the Wairau Valley, really sort of right at the heart of the original vine-growing area for Marlborough. Their near neighbours include Cloudy Bay, Hans Herzog, Jackson Estate, Hunters, Alan Scott. So it's a well-situated 24-hectare estate on the alluvial soils of this region. Now, unfortunately, Baron Benjamin de Rothschild died suddenly in 2021, leaving his wife, Ariane, to take over the management of his companies. Of the estate's 24 hectares, 20 are planted to Sauvignon Blanc and the balance to Pinot Noir. Since 2020, they've been applying what they call regenerative and organic practices in the vineyard, and I've seen 2024 claimed as the date for certification by BioGrow. Now, I'm not sure whether that's a certification that's already gone ahead now in August, or whether that's something they're expecting to happen later in the year. But certainly organic certification is in the offing. Now, Plot 101 is a single 2.6 hectare plot of vines, whose location and soil composition are ideally suited to producing grapes with pungent flavours and aromas and a real minerality. The soils here are stony, free-draining Rappaura series soils with a fine, silty top layer above them. Vine age of the plantings is 22 years. The wine, of course, is 100% Sauvignon Blanc. It's all hand-picked, and the fruit is handled very gently. On arrival at the winery, it's whole bunch pressed very slowly using a pneumatic press, with the idea of getting very clean juice. That juice is then allowed to cold settle to further clarify it. The information about fermentation is a little confused. Certainly the wine's back label suggests that 50% of the wine is fermented in oak barrels. The remaining 50% ferments in stainless steel tanks with temperature control. I've also seen other suggestions that everything ferments in stainless steel tanks. However, those suggestions gave a temperature range for fermentation between 11 and 18 degrees C, and 18 to me sounds more like a temperature for barrel fermentation than for temperature controlled fermentation in tank, where presumably you'd want to keep the temperature reasonably low to stop the aromas being stripped out by too rapid a fermentation. I guess it's possible there's actually even a halfway house there. The fermentation might have started in stainless steel tanks and half of it might have been run off into oak to finish fermentation there. Either way, the oak being used is French oak. They're larger barrels, they're puncheons, which are 450 to 500 litres in size. And of those barrels, 20% will be new in a year. So there's not going to be a huge influence of new oak in this, because you're using larger barrels and only 10% of the wine sees new oak. The wine ages half in tank and half in barrel on its lees for 6 months prior to bottling. Now, production of this particular Now, production of the lot 101 is fairly limited. They only made 1,500 cases of this. I think the idea is that this is a more complex example of Sauvignon Blanc that has an ability to age. They say it should age for 2 to 5 years. So this should be starting to mature now, but still have the freshness to continue to develop. So, looking at it, we have a fairly pale yellowish colour there. It's more of a sort of a straw hint than a vibrant yellow. The wine is described as having 13% alcohol on its label. Swirling it, there are some slight tears forming, but they take a little while to form. It's not a particularly viscous wine. So let's have a look at the aroma, shall we? The aromas are certainly on the pungent end of the Sauvignon Blanc spectrum. There are some greenish notes. There's certainly an asparagus note. There's a green capsicum note. There are hints of gooseberry, that's the thing. But also there's a slightly sulphury note, actually. There may be a slight touch of egginess to it. There's certainly a note of what's described as sort of cattiness, quite a pungent, that pungent aroma you get when you know the tomcats have been around. So yes, so there's some quite particular aromas to this. They're quite intense. So let's have a taste. On the palate, the flavours are actually quite rich. You've got notes of guava, kiwi fruit, passion fruit. There's really quite an intensity to the flavour. And quite a sort of a depth and richness to the flavours as well. But underlying that lovely rich fruit, there's a real mineral note to the acidity. There are saline touches. It's very, very precise. I can feel the acidity down the sides of my tongue. It's not necessarily sharp or tart, because there's a good intensity of that sort of gooseberry, passion fruit, kiwi fruit, those quite tropical flavours. And there's this slightly rich texture. I mean, this is a light to medium bodied wine, but there's a richness of the texture of the fruit right in the mid palate. It almost feels as if there's a tiny touch of sugar being retained in this. I mean, it's not impossible. This might have 4 or 5 grams of sugar just to try and balance some tart acidity. But actually, I'm getting more the impression that it's a richness of the fruit, and actually probably something you don't see a lot of on Sauvignon Blanc. A little bit of richness coming from lees aging, richness and roundness. It's not really quite coming through as creaminess. It's actually very well integrated with the fruit, and you're seeing that sort of richness of that pure fruit instead. The minerality of the finish lingers, and you're getting a very fine, long, sort of sapid finish. It's leaving me mouth-watering all the time. As I say, without being tart, there's not a greenness to the acidity. The capsicum notes that seemed apparent on the aromas aren't coming through on the palate, where the fruit has a sort of much more soft, rounded, tropical note. The oak on the wine is not particularly obvious, providing some complexity both in terms of flavour, but also in terms of the wine's texture. Towards the finish, there are perhaps slight toasty notes, and actually that's where I am starting to see some of the creaminess of the lees aging. This has a lovely long finish. I'm not sure that this is a wine that's completely in balance. There was something possibly slightly sulfidic about the aromas that I wasn't really particularly keen on. But I have to say, despite the fact I feel this is perhaps a little unbalanced, there really is a lovely character to the fruit. I do enjoy the way that the flavours are lasting, the pungency on the front palate, and its crisp, clean finish. I don't think this is a wine I'd necessarily age at all. Having looked at its Wine Searcher aggregated critic score, which is 91 out of 100 for this vintage, I do slightly wonder whether that's a little generous, but actually at the same time there are things I really love about this wine, so maybe it's a flawed beauty. I certainly don't have too much trouble with that sort of score. It has some qualities which lifts it above an everyday Sauvignon Blanc. It has some extra dimensions that give it some interest. Maybe with a couple of years, those might actually all come into harmony and show really well. I'm not necessarily totally convinced at the moment, but there are plenty of elements that I'm really quite enjoying in the wine. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found the video and what I've said about the wine of interest. If you'd like to watch more of these videos, do please subscribe to our channel, and that way you can set yourself an alert and you can be notified every time we publish a new video. If you have any comments, please pop those in the comments box below. We'd be really interested to hear your feedback on the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. If you have any friends you think might like to watch the video, do please feel free to pass it on to them. That would be fantastic. I will leave a link in the notes below so that you can follow that to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, and there you can find out more about the background of the winemaking, what the critics have said about it, any awards it's won, the region it's from, its grape variety, possible food matches, and you can look at its pricing history. Hopefully all the background information you could possibly need if you're thinking of purchasing this wine. So thank you so much for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future. Thanks again. Bye for now.